Welcome to the Agile Project Management Development course. My hope is to take these 20 highlight slides and give you a taste of project management and provide some easy-to-use templates just in case you find yourself in the event of managing or running a project. My name is Taylor Mogford. I also go by Mog. I had my first project manager experience while volunteering for a program called Eighth in the East, which was a nonprofit that was aimed at sustaining historic World War II monuments and airfields that had been decommissioned. We did this in order to help keep the English and American culture alive. In 2017, I worked at the Battlefield Airmen Training Group as a facility manager, logistician, VCO, and assistant corps. I've completed 47 projects from start to finish since January of 2018 through my civilian employer, Improve Group. I will try and keep this presentation short, and I will spend most amount of my time on the areas that I feel will add the most amount of value to you. At the end of this, please go check out my other content on Evolve. I've created 9 templated tools that are free and downloadable for you to use immediately in your work centers for helping you build schedules, performing and conducting analysis, and setting goals. In fact, most of the slides I'm covering today, I've either created a template for you to use in your work center, or come back to revisit separately, or I have curated the content for you to be able to learn more in depth. So why project management? Well, a recent study by TeamStage has found that over 70% of all projects fail. That means that 70% of projects are not done on time or on budget. Over 47 projects, my failure rate's less than 5%. It means 2 of those were failures in either time or budget. But hey, nobody's perfect. I'm also briefing you because in a lot of ways, I'm like you. Had to operate under a constraint of time and money. In a lot of those scenarios, I've had to deal with issues in supply chain, issues with vendors, and having to negotiate terms and deliver a successful result. Whether you realize it or not, some of the things you do in order to be successful in your job that you're in right now derive from project management. We'll be covering specifically Agile, since Agile project management divides into smaller pieces and is easier to manage. It's also easier to handle change, and it also allows for the whole team to know the progress of a project. The PMI, or Project Management Institute, is the governing body of the primary certification in project management, which is the PMP, or the Project Management Professional, which is governed by the PMBOK. Project overview. I want to quickly go over goals, mission, and vision. If there's no business value to the project should not be started. Projects are a temporary endeavor with a very definitive beginning and end. Without the items on this slide, you'll find yourself struggling to kill a project that's already been closed, and you'll find yourself dealing with it as it comes back to life again and again. If you find yourself in that situation, it's because it was a project for you to manage, but that it was a process for somebody else. Projects have to have an alignment of a goal, has to be mission driven, and there has to be a clear vision on what that client is trying to achieve. SMART goals and the trifecta, as I like to call it. SMART goals are a really good way to quantify and hold yourself accountable to a goal, making sure that it's feasible. And it's really helpful in projects if at the very beginning you set yourself up to be accountable and making sure that what you're trying to achieve is realistic. The trifecta, if you will, the balance to achieve quality through time, cost, and scope, is as identified in PMBOK. Personally, I prefer what a CE mentor of mine and a previous commander had told me, where he saw it as time, money, and people in order to make something successful and quality, which essentially you can operate with 2 of those items and only 1 missing, assuming that you can leverage the 2 heavier in usage. So if you had a shortage of time, you could compensate that with money and people. If you had a shortage of money, you could compensate that with time and people. And if you had a shortage of people, you could leverage time and money to to offset that. Stakeholders and organizational structure. You may have been selected within your organization to perform a project. You might have had an experienced project team or new members join you in your endeavors as well. You might be working with different agencies, people from a whole bunch of different backgrounds. You might be in a completely new organization altogether. Really creating a visual understanding of your new organization in those parallel organizations that are working this project with you really help you identify project sponsors and spot potential for stopgaps, scope creep, and barriers that you may come across. It also helps you understand who may have some influence, who you might be able to work and counsel with as advisors. Really help you kind of visualize those different departments and identify areas of resistance that could become risk. That leads into the stakeholder analysis. A successful project can really be defined by a few things. Is the customer happy? Did we complete the project on budget and on time? It's tough because a recent study from the Technical University of Denmark's Project Lab program found that 1 in every 3 projects has literally no baseline. Even more concerning is that they also found in their study that less than 1/3 of projects are completed on time and on budget, which is pretty much in line with the other study that we found. This reflects just how difficult resource management planning can be and how hard it is to monitor and control a project. With that, really understanding who you need to deal with in terms of influence and interest across stakeholders really becomes key. For me personally, I like to take a kind of a playbook from Scrum, and once I have my shareholders kind of all gathered up and identified, and we're all on the same page past the project kickoff, I like to just try to have a 10-minute conversation with them weekly. Keep them on the same page. Keep the transparency there. And, depending who you need to deal with more, it's really up to you and how that frequency is done. Definitely work on it and go with what works for you. And if it's not working, then come back and take another look at it. That also lends into project resources. And resources really vary across a few different things, which also we kind of covered within the project shareholder analysis. Really just thinking about all of the different areas that can impact time, money, things that are really going to pull your bandwidth in terms of people, and really think about the constraints you have in terms of facilities and equipment. You're that center kind of brain center, or that headquarters that really is kind of balancing that network out. You'll find that there's some things that you necessarily can't control, which is frustrating, such as freight, and sometimes equipment too. A SWOT analysis is important because it can really help to identify risk. A SWOT analysis can be done for product, place, industry, or a person. These kind of analysis help with strategic planning and decision making, as it introduces opportunities to your organization as a forward-looking bridge to generate alternatives. It's important to point out that strengths and weaknesses are current or backward-looking, and opportunities and threats are forward-looking. By performing a SWOT analysis, we are able to build a bridge between what your organization has accomplished to date and the strategic alternatives that they can do tomorrow. Internal factors are strengths and weaknesses of the company. Strengths are characteristics that give your organization its competitive advantage, while the weaknesses are those characteristics that you'll need to help overcome in order to improve performance. Some examples of internal factors could be staffing, operational efficiency or capacity, financial resources, and organizational structure. Your external factors are the opportunities and threats to the company, and those opportunities are elements that the company sees in the external environment that it could pursue in the future to generate value. Threats are elements in the external environment that could prevent the company from achieving its goal or its mission of creating value. Some examples of external factors are customers, competitors, maybe government regulations or AFIs, maybe they're governing things or supplemental within your installation. They could be suppliers, partners, market trends. Those are just a few. A work breakdown structure helps break each element of a project scope into tasks and then breaks them even more or further down into granular chunks so that you can see as much detail as possible so you can capture specifics. This is important because you're not going to necessarily know how to do everything that needs to be done. If you're building an entire building, there might be a piece of scope of that you don't understand. Maybe it's a trade, it's plumbing, it's the electrical, maybe it's the HVAC. When you break this web down with your team, this will be able to identify those things that you don't understand, and that will help you overcome that knowledge gap. I'm supply by trade, so it says a lot that I've been able to do a lot of construction and tech and bounce between the two. Communication for me has literally been my key to success. If you don't know something, that's fine. Take the mindset of the normal culture of assumptions and throw that out the window. Assumptions are awesome in project management. Assumptions, though, are only worthy to you and helpful to you if you make those assumptions know. An example of that could be like if you're going to have a foundation done. I could say in a kickoff or a sidebar meeting, before we have to execute that, hey, I'm assuming when we do this foundation that you're going to need a cure time of X amount of hours. I make that assumption because that allows that partner or that shareholder that's going to be physically performing that work to correct me and to help feel empowered, and that helps build trust because that's letting them know that their voice is important. And that also lets us overcome barriers and things that could kind of really hem us up on the back end. Don't be afraid to go through this and say, I don't know. Again, as long as you voice your concerns and really talk through things, you'll be fine. Scopes. Project scopes are personally my favorite because scopes set expectations. They should be crafted on the front end whenever somebody thinks that they need a project and they're starting to piece it together to pursue one. The more detail you have, the better. Feel free to add a high-level version of a work breakdown structure in here as well. While scopes of work are used to quantify an opportunity prior to project inception, they also are used to see if it's viable to even undertake a project. They also typically accompany the request for pricing or request for quote documents. Personally, the reason why I like a scope, apart from the expectation piece, is I like to use mine as a living document, especially for a project kickoff. It helps the team understand what we're doing, and I typically add the vision and objective in mind too, to keep it super focused and the intent there the entire way. The customer also can review it at kickoff, and shareholders and vendors, this is a good chance to use to make sure that they're in alignment with the goals as well. This level of transparency has prevented a lot of scope creep for me. Gants. Gotta have the Gants. Henry Gantt originally introduced the first chronological chart to help kind of quantify the timeline of a project. It's essentially the crazy, awesome looking thing of horizontal bars that are on a project plan to show you your timeline. And again, it's just known as a Gantt chart. I honestly hate building these out, but they are the best way to track progress and set yourself up for success. There can be so many different pieces, and depending the larger that you go, the more in depth and crazier your Gantt will be. But again, it really helps identify overlapping areas where you may have some competing bandwidth of resources, and really just, again, adds that transparency and allows you to manage that risk up front. For me and how I manage my Gantt, I use the 50-50 rule from the PMBOK to measure timeline, meaning you don't have like this weird 76, 48%. If you start something, it's 50% until that line item's completed within your scope on your Gantt. And once it's complete, it's 100%, 50-50. Again, I love this 50-50 rule to measure because there's no guessing what a quarter of the way means. Keeps it really transparent for everybody involved. If I said we're 76% on X task, and that may be a trade that you've never worked, you probably wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But everybody can grasp that something's been started, and everybody understands that something's done. Budgets. Ironically, this is my favorite part. I'm a closer. Having a neat end to a project with a better outcome than anticipated at the beginning is good for everybody. Knowing that I've helped an organization is a cherry on top. However, none of that means anything if you don't know where your money is. If you aren't controlling it, it's already in somebody else's pocket, or somebody's already trying to obligate it to something else. A customer knows what they spent. A unit knows what money they've obligated. Manage your budget. Task management. This is important. Again, you may not be a SME in the majority of the work you are managing. A general contractor in the commercial industry typically only self-performs 30% themselves. That means most of the scope is subbed out to other vendors that they're having to manage. This is done for many reasons, primarily bandwidth. You can't have somebody do 20, 30 different things every given moment, every day. It takes delegation, just like you may do in your work center to be successful. For our military members, this is important because it might be your first project or your event. Don't worry about using a fancy system. Use what you're comfortable with. Again, you've been chosen because you've proven results in the past. Typically, project managers come from a different craft or a different field. You're go-getters. You got this. I believe it. I need you to believe it. If objective-based task management works for you, like I've had on this slide, go for it. Don't try to adopt a large-scale systematic approach right away if you don't understand it. You're already trying to learn so many different things. Start with what you're comfortable with. And as you learn to get comfortable in those areas, get better across the way. Kanban. Kanban was originally created by Toyota for manufacturing. It takes simple columns for small product or project teams to track bite-sized pieces of tasks. And these little kind of task areas are either called tasks or cards. They can also be called story cards. And there's a ton of things out there, especially some that are free. One of the free tools that I personally use is Trello, and I also sometimes use it within a Miro board, which is a free whiteboard. Again, both of those tools are free. Personally, for a typical kind of task management and project overview, I use Trello because it kind of allows you that kind of top view when you look at it. It's aesthetically pleasing. It works really well on a desktop on Nipper at your work center. It also is really good on mobile. So if you're having to work from your work center or in a hybrid environment in this kind of world that we live in today, it's super nice because you can work physically on site on base. You can manage your Trello through there, and then when you walk away, it'll be synced up with your app on your phone, which is nice. Feel free to take a deeper look into Kanbans and really just use it how it works for you and your team. Project life cycle. I like to highlight this as a reminder that projects are temporary. The primary difference, again, between a program and a project, or a project and a process, is that a project has a very definitive beginning, and at some point you're done with it. The only time you want to come back to a project is if it's for a brand new project for the same client or organization. Again, don't be afraid to mix up methodologies and add your insight into it. Do again what works for you. Don't be afraid to mix it up and try different things and experiment. I had a snippet of a sprint I did here that was completely separate to a project. But I wanted to put this in here to highlight different uses such as theory of constraints or Scrum in terms of taking things that work in those methodologies and kind of really just a la carting them to you and your style. Again, I use Scrum for meetings and touchpoint styles. I use theory of constraints to try to understand where we're starting with a project and what's coming at the end to ask questions in terms of how that's going to be sustained. Because again, it's a project for us. It could be a process for somebody else. Maybe this wasn't an endeavor that was really thought out completely. Do what works for you to add transparency and enable creativity so that you can solve problems as they arise. Project portfolios. This is a little taboo, but it's just for you. So why do you need one? Well, project portfolios essentially are a way to highlight all the work that you've done. It's the golden tool to go make that money. I have a snippet of the cover of mine. People hold these really close to the vest. And honestly, I'm no exception to that. This is one of the greatest ways to highlight that you're battle-tested. A lot of times in the military or government, you control a budget, but you never really have any say. There's not a ton of consequences if you don't execute within the budget. You're a salary employee. In the commercial world, your job's on the line for every project you execute. And if you're like me and you're operating 8 to 10 of these at a time, that means you just times 8 to 10 your risk to maybe not having a job anymore, providing for your family. This job pays because it's stressful and fulfilling. And I started that line off with stressful because that's normally what it is up front before you get that fulfilling piece. If you have the time, make your own website, honestly, to highlight your projects. I've learned in having a document to accompany my resume that most online vetting only lets you upload one document. Now, I've tried to be pretty clever, and I've tried to throw my cover letter on top of this bad boy, but I'm not 100% sure how that's been received. If you want some experiences and be able to talk about how this looks, and if you want to see mine, I'd love to chat with you one-on-one on what my experience has been with this. I want to keep my secret sauce a secret, but if you have family that has some kind of secret sauce, they'll share it with friends and family, meaning I'll share mine with you, because I want you to be able to learn from my experiences and what I've seen. This also differs a little bit from the construction and technical project world. If you have the time to burn and you're early in your transition, honestly, I would build that into a website. Highlight the biggest things that you really want to accomplish that's not captured on your resume. Throw that sucker into your LinkedIn, put it in the header of your resume, and don't be afraid to experiment and go trial by error. A transition is called a transition because it takes time to move from the thing that you previously did to the experiences you're living in the present. And again, feel free to reach out to me. We could talk on this one-on-one, and I can share my profile document on this. Just make sure you're tracking what you're accomplishing. You do it already for performance reports. Do it for something that'll help you when you've retired or walked away from the military so that you can up that revenue you generate for you and your family. With that, I hope you enjoyed this overview of project management. I've tried to keep this short so that you can hammer this out within a small amount of time and either get some answers or some insight, or just see if this is something that really interests you. A lot of people I've seen spend 10 to 20 years to get into project management, then they find out they hate it. Try to, while you're in the military and you have some opportunities to champion some projects, try it out while it doesn't cost you anything. Try it out while you have that safety net. This QR code on the slide is my Apple contact card, which contains my work email, personal and business cell numbers. I want everyone that is going to put or think about putting sweat equity into this craft to be successful. I am open to talking about any portion of this course in depth on any of the projects I've managed and share information on pro-veteran employers as well. I want y'all to do well. Or, if you want me to come by and help you manage an opportunity in my civilian capacity, that's always a possibility as well. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.